So, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Inshallah, today we're going to continue with Surah An-Nisa. And yesterday we went in details in regards to the word love in the Quran. We said, to make the story short, we said that there are 8 categories that were mentioned in the Quran in terms of love. Of who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves. And we went in details of who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had mentioned in the Quran as loving. And of course, we also mentioned the 8 different categories that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did mentioned that He does not love. So we went into saying that there are 8 people that were mentioned in the Quran. Number one, those that are muhsineen, those are muttaqun, sabirun, mutawakkilun, مقسطون توابون مطهرون and المتطهرون. And of course, what that would simply mean in English, let's put that translate so we could actually see the words themselves in English. And what that means is basically the people that are in highest level of piety, not necessarily the term the good, but this is actually the highest level in piety, in where they're the people that would invest for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're the people that hold their temper, and they're the people that are always acting in patience. And the muttaqun, basically here, they translated it as, or at least the AI translation, as the pious. And we said al-muttaqun are really a step further than just wanting to be a person of commitment, but because of their deep commitment, they basically stay away from haram even farther than the limit. And those that are patient, and we said patient, whether they're patient in embracing the commandments of the Lord Almighty, or whether, of course, in the obligations, or whether that was in staying away from the different forbidden, prohibited things. And that would basically entail a lot of patience as well, because especially if the person is addicted to something, they definitely are going to endure a lot of patience, a lot of commitment, and certainly a lot of hardship. And the person that is trustworthy is basically a person that is committed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in where they connect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and trust Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So mutawakkilun is not an accurate translation to translate to be translated in trustworthy. It is more a person that is dependent on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Al-muqsitun are basically the people that act in justice. The people, التوابون, are the ones to repent. The ones المتطهرون and مطهرون are basically the ones to basically stay in purification, self, whether inner purification or whether external slash physical purification. And of course, we mentioned that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had mentioned the reasons why these people were basically beloved to the Lord Almighty, simply because they invest, they have a commitment that requires a lot of patience, and certainly that requires a lot of inner struggle, and throughout the night and throughout the day. And of course, we had mentioned that there are 4 key elements for making what makes morality. Number one, identifying justice. Two, embracing and enduring patience. And number three, satisfaction. You're limiting yourself to at least what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given you as permissible. And number four, which is living and embracing courage despite all the different maybe threats or maybe offers to let you go of the principle of the Lord Almighty. You stay strong, courageous, and holding on to the principle of the Lord Almighty despite and regardless of all those that are trying to steer you away from holding on to the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we also said that the things that make a person that make a person actually go stronger and give them the capacity and the capability of actually enduring that amount of patience, or at least being courageous, is number one, is al-infaq, spending for the sake of the Lord Almighty, giving up for the sake of the Lord Almighty. And what we mean by spending is not necessarily only investing in money, but that would also mean investing in effort. So if you don't have the money to invest in bringing in a change within the society, at least invest in your effort, in whatever effort you have and you're capable of giving. And certainly taqwa, and we mentioned that it's staying away a mile farther, metaphorically speaking, a mile farther away from the borders of haram, and trying to maintain a distance to make sure that you're never falling in haram. And the last thing was kadhim al-ghayth, where you're keeping your temper, and of course from your temper controlling you, that is from being impulsive to being a person of faith, a person of morality, a person of good morality is a person that basically holds on to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The 8 things that we had mentioned that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not love are basically: number 1, the transgressors, the oppressors, those that cause destruction, those that misuse, or at least they would misuse their energy, whether that meant wealth or whether that meant physical energy or any type of force, misusing it in where it does not belong is basically israf. And the mustakbirun are basically the arrogant ones. And we said and went in details in regards to arrogance. And we said when a person is arrogant, they're going to end up putting themselves as the center, and that will block their capacity and ability from recognizing truth, recognizing morality, and recognizing justice. And simply that takes them a mile farther, into where it will, we said, noon, betray those that are basically traitors. Those are the ones that betray, and simply those that would be the ones that arrogant, and they would present themselves as victims when in reality they're nothing but people that had betrayed others. And al-kafirun, the disbelievers, and we said for the word disbeliever can actually mean 2 things. Number 1, those that deny gratitude, and 2, those that would deny Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we mentioned al-farihun, and we said it's not the joyful people per se, but it's basically the people that are constantly living, feeding their own joy to mean haram joy. So they're just building more and more joy and entertainment in life at the expense of the boundaries and the principles of the Lord Almighty. And of course, this was to indicate those that would run after, of course, entertainment, after addiction, after different methods that are just getting them into some form of, I guess, this type of dunya pleasure. Those are the people that would be included, and certainly this is what it is referring to. So if you were to go to the English one, the word was actually using those that are joyful. So this is not accurate. We mentioned it there. That's why it's really important to actually go back to the Arabic word, because if you were to actually use that AI translation, you're going to come up with definitely a weird looking Islam. So yes, you can be happy. A Muslim is supposed to be happy. Remember, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually said that the believers, لا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون, that they will not face fear and they're not going to be facing sorrow. So therefore, to actually think and interpret that a believer is basically a sad person is not accurate. So then we go back to that ayat because we need to figure out what these ayat are saying. يستخفون من الناس. So again, within the parameter of the munafiqeen and within the parameter of the story of course, the story of Bani Ubayriq, those the Bashir, Bushair, and or at least Mubashir, that had basically stolen the items from the Rifa'a ibn Zayd, and of course, and they were discovered. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically exposed the truth, even when the Prophet ﷺ himself didn't actually know the truth. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exposes them, and of course they certainly did not like that. So one of them runs away and leaves Islam because he did not want to be exposed, and certainly he was basically so arrogant that he didn't want to submit to justice. He just wanted to basically just live in his own arrogance. And of course, we continued, وَمَن يَعْمَلْ سُوءًا أَوْ يَظْلِمْ نَفْسَهُ ثُمَّ يَسْتَغْفِرِ اللَّهَ يَجِدِ اللَّهَ غَفُورًا رَحِيمًا. So وَمَن يَعْمَلْ سُوءًا, whoever commits, the word is su'. So because the word is su', I thought it would actually be good to differentiate and help us understand the difference between su' and khati'ah and ظلم النفس and al-ithm. So let me underline these words. So you've got the word su, you've got the word ظلم, you've got the word ithm, you've got the word kasb or yaksib, and we've got the word khati'ah. Okay? And we've got the word buhtan. So all of these words, if I were to translate it in English, it would just really be one, which is committing a sin. But in Arabic, there's actually more intricate meanings, more intricate details of what the word really carries and the details of what the words really mean. So the word su, and that's why we're going to actually just go just a little bit out. Okay. The word su would basically, let's see right there. I'm just going to take you. Here we go. So the word sayya or su, and now I'm going to show you right there. Let's see, maybe we could give you the link to help you kind of see it. All right. Some people want the link, so we'll give them the link. All right. So this is in Arabic. This is a trusted website. It's called Islam Web. They actually have great articles done. So we're just going to make the story short, and rather than us doing all the research, they basically made the story easy for us, and they basically translated it for us. So the word sayyi'ah or the word su, which we see right here, the word mayamal su'an, whoever commits a sin or oppresses themselves, then they would seek forgiveness, or they would ask forgiveness from the Lord Almighty. They would find Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala most forgiving and most merciful. So the question is, what is a su and what is dhulm al-nafs? So when you look at the word su, that actually is coming from the word sa'a. That's the root of it. So the root is sa'a. Let's put the roots. We can see each and every single word. And remember, the conjugation of the verb is actually important because it is inspired from it. So the word sa'a actually means to go out of bound, to go out of boundary, to go beyond what is actually of a person's interest. Okay, so let's put it right there. Let's say go out of interest. So we're talking about interest. Am I writing this right? Okay, go out of what is of your own interest, of what brings in an interest to you. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically mentioned السيئة and the السوء. Okay, I'm just gonna go really quick and actually go online into there are these beautiful apps that could actually give you the word and how many times it was. So the word sa'a and su in the Quran, tasu'hum, sayyatikum, etc., all the roots, it had been mentioned 167 times. Okay, so let's write it down 167 times in where it was mentioned, at least the root. Okay, and the word was mentioned such as وَإِن تُصِبْكُمْ سَيِّئَةٌ يَفْرَحُوا بِهَا. And if you were to be pricked with something that is not of your interest, they would be happy about it. And of course, this is one ayah within this context. It doesn't always necessarily have to mean, of course, one thing which is plain evil, but in this context is that if you were pricked with something that is out of your interest, something that is not good for you, then they would be happy of it. Of course, who is basically the enemy. وَإِن تُصِبْهُمْ سَيِّئَةٌ يَقُولُوا هَذِهِ مِنْ عِنْدِكَ. And if an evil thing were to happen to them or something that is out of their interest, they would basically accuse and they would attribute it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let's go for al-khati'ah. So the word khati'ah comes from the word khata. So khata basically means mistake. Okay, so al-khata basically mistake, and it can be something that is done on purpose or by basically doing it basically with not intending to do something evil. So il-khata can be when you did something and it was basically a wrong thing by mistake or by intending to harm. Okay, let's see. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us to make the dua, ربنا لا تؤاخذنا إن نسينا أو أخطأنا. O Lord Almighty, do not hold us accountable for things that we had forgotten or the things that we had done by mistake. How many times was it mentioned in the Quran? The root khata or khatayakum or khata, khatiin, khit'an, khataya, etc. That was actually mentioned in roots 22 times. All right. Allah subhanahu
Can
wa
I
ta'ala.
ask? I'm sorry. Can I
Go
ask
ahead.
you what is the difference between those two, though?
I'm gonna get
Is
there, inshallah.
oh,
Yep,
sorry,
I'm
sorry.
gonna get there. Yep. ليس عليكم جناح فيما أخطأتم به ولكن ما تعمدت قلوبكم. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says there's no sin upon you in what you had made or had committed by mistake, but what your hearts had intended to do. In other words, this is telling us that the word khata, the word mistake, can be to, oh, just give me a second. Sorry about that. Sorry about that. All right. So when you look at this A, وَلَيْسَ عَلَيْكُمْ جُنَاحٌ فِيمَا أَخْطَأْتُمْ بِهِ, that there's no sin on what you had committed by mistake. That actually means ما أخطأتم به ولكن ما تعمدت قلوبكم. That basically means that the word mistake can be of something that you intend to do or something that you basically do by mistake to mean that you didn't intend to do. Okay, Al-Asfahani explains, see right there, sorry about that. Al-Asfahani explains that when we're, oh, now it's not allowing me to do this. Okay, where'd it go? All right. Al-Asfahani explains that al-khati'ah and the sayyi'ah, they have here's what he says, very close meanings. But al-khati'ah mainly is said for something that you basically intend to do. But of course, when we're speaking about having the intention to do something, many times it's basically what it results in. Okay, keep that in mind. Where we're talking about something, it's bringing in a particular consequence. Let's continue more with understanding more in terms of the differences. Al-Baydawi, a very important scholar of tafsir, he had explained the difference, and he said, as a matter of fact, is sayyi'ah, or basically is the sayyi'ah, which is basically the root sa'a, is more pertaining to things that you intended for a certain cause. And al-khati'ah, on the other hand, so he disagreed with al-Asfahani. Al-khati'ah is more for things that you don't intend to bring about a particular consequence, but it actually resulted in something that you absolutely did not expect the consequence to be in that direction. Let's go forward. We're going to get back to the ayat so we could see it and understand more. Yet, so we're here, as of course, looking at two words. Number one is su and al-khati'ah. So those are very similar. So now we came to the conclusion that a su would basically be a sin that a person commits basically out of their own, that is not within their interest. And the khati'ah would basically be something that one commits not necessarily because they necessarily always intend. Because if you commit a sin that you do not intend and you didn't mean to do something, there was no intention to harm, but it still is causing a wrong consequence, that would be a khati'ah. Okay, so now the word su is more speaking about going beyond a limit, going beyond interest. Okay, al-khati'ah is basically looking at it from the angle of the consequence that it had in the outcome of what this type of behavior had brought. And of course, then we would look, if the person had committed al-khati'ah, the mistake, intending to harm, then in that situation, they'll be held accountable for it and they will be considered at sin. But if a person commits basically a mistake, but it still brought in a wrong consequence, you're driving down the road, and of course, while you're driving, you basically, by mistake, looked at your phone, whatever it is, and then by mistake, you basically hit the car in front of you. You didn't mean to hit the car, but you still hit it. So in that situation, you're going to be accountable. You're going to be held accountable. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in that situation, although you're going to be held accountable, not in akhirah because you didn't mean to hurt the car in front of you, but you're still responsible for hitting the car in front of you. And therefore, you have to compensate the person, talk to your insurance, and basically say the truth that you're responsible for this and whatever that result happened. All right. So you're not held accountable unless you were negligent. If there's negligence, then in that situation, you're going to be held accountable. But if there's no negligence, you hit a ball and it was supposed to be, in the driveway. You basically are really good at shooting balls, but this time, by mistake, a wind came in and boom, it basically somehow took the ball and broke your neighbor's glass. And although you didn't intend such a mistake, but you still have to compensate and fix the neighbor's glass. But it was the wind that took the ball that way. It wasn't you.
Is
But
that the
still,
same thing with your kid?
same thing with your kid. Same thing with maybe your dog or whatever it is. Anything that you own, anything that belongs to you. All right. You know what? Let's do it this way. Let's assume your car was parked in the driveway. Okay. And of course, I'm a Minnesotan, so the car basically parked in the driveway. What happened was the roads were slippery and the car, I guess your incline was big. Your car, basically, because of the slippery ice, you weren't in the car. You weren't in the car. Okay. But your car basically reversed and knocked down your neighbor's mailbox. You weren't in the car. The car knocked down the neighbor's mailbox. But this is your car. But I didn't tell the car to slip that way. Yes, but this is your car. You should actually have a shared responsibility for what the car had actually done. Now, there in that scenario, there are differences of opinions between scholars if we're talking about something that you totally didn't control. In other words, it's basically a result of the sky. This is what they would consider it. A result that you have no power, you had no power over, but this car just slipped and knocked down the neighbor's mailbox. So in that situation, scholars would debate on whether this would basically be outside of your control, even if the car is controlled by you. But we're just here mentioning some of the opinions that the scholars had mentioned. I'm just laying it out for you. But if, for example, we're talking about an intended or at least a behavior that you could be responsible for, such as your child, I don't know, sometimes kids can do the stupidest things that you would never expect. Went to maybe your neighbor's yard and she was so happy about planting her organic stuff and just goes there and just takes out all those plants. Okay. Just uproots those plants. That situation, you can't say, well, he's just a little kid. No, you're gonna have to compensate. You were supposed to hold your kid. Same thing if, let's say, it was a dog. If it's your dog, for example, okay, you basically are responsible for this. Or, your horse, whatever it is. All right. This is just an idea. Now, one thing. All right. Now, one thing. أو يظلم نفسه. ظلم النفس. I want you to look at this one. So, right there, ظلم النفس is basically a slightly different because although, ظلم النفس is basically coming from ظلم. ظلم النفس is quite different. And we're going to get to ظلم and ظلام and all of that in just a bit. ظلم النفس basically means to oppress oneself. But how is it if we were to commit a sin, we're oppressing ourselves? Who would oppress themselves? You would oppress yourself simply because when you commit basically a sin, it is out of your interest. Remember when we said the word sa'a is to do something out of interest? When you basically commit a sin, it is not going to be of your own interest, and therefore you are the one that in that situation is going to be bringing the result of what the outcomes of whatever behavior or whatever you had committed. The outcome is going to be on you. This is important to mention because The Quran is always relating that any harm that you would do, that yes, there's an outcome on others, but there's also, here this one takes us to this one, yaksib ithman. I want you to look at this one and I want you to put these dots together and relate it to one another. Volm nafs is when you oppress yourself. Yaksib ithman, the word yaksib actually means to gain. Il-ithm actually means a sin. But that's not enough to actually say about the sin. So I'm going to take you back in order to see a couple things here. Number one, we're looking at dhanb and ithm. Now, when you look at dhanb and ithm, although in English they would be synonyms, but in Arabic, there's more intricate details. The word dhanb is usually entailing what would actually bring about a wrong result. In other words, the aftermath. So very similar to khati'ah, which is the word that we were doing right here. But this was more relating, like we said, on what is the intention and what is the outcome. And the word then is exactly sharing the same etymology as the word dhanab, which means tail. So when you look at the word tail, it would basically mean that there's something behind. There's something that is tracing back, in where then you don't always see the result of that behavior or the whatever you had committed right away, but it would show in the end. It will trace, and you're capable of tracing that particular then. Okay, so let's say, give an example. The person is drinking. Well, drinking led to them probably losing their job, probably killing somebody, probably DWI. So that is then. What happened? It basically is traced back. The aftermath, killing the person, losing a job, it is traced back to the addiction. Okay, so when you're looking at a sin, sometimes you can trace it back. Il-khati'ah is not necessarily always traced back. Okay, il-khati'ah, let's say this person abused this young orphan. All right, abused this young orphan. And later, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala retaliated for the orphan, in where, for example, they got cancer. Cancer and the child basically being abused, those two sides are irrelevant to one another in our own vision. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us not quite. A lot of the different things you don't recognize how they're traced back, but then we could trace back the outcome of how this brought about a certain result. But that person that abused a child, we weren't capable of tracing back why that person got cancer. All we could say is that person got cancer because, well, the tests are showing they were smokers. They were, they got cancer because their DNA, a number of different reasons that basically triggered them getting cancer. But we don't see that there's any relevance between them getting cancer and the child abuse that they were doing. Okay, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that a lot of the different outcomes as a result of sin would basically come, even if you may not recognize the relevance of it. Let's continue. Al-ithm, on the other hand, unlike al-dhanb, in where al-ithm is something that, number one, It basically slows down good deeds. It basically slows down your ability to engage in good. So, what does that mean? Let's say you're trying to pray, all right? But every single time you try to invest in prayer, you find yourself weaker. You find yourself, this is getting boring. I can't even focus. I can't, and so many different things, they just come in and you're not capable of engaging in prayer. Why? It's a result of ithm. Ithm are basically different types of sins that would slow down your engagement in good, that would slow down your ability to focus on spirituality, that would slow down your ability to engage in commitment in good deeds. I want you to look at these. So that's why when you look at ما يكسب خطيئة أو إثما, sometimes they can be synonyms, okay? But it's really important to look at these like differences, especially if you're trying to figure out your spiritual process. What's slowing it down? Why am I not able to grow? So you're going to look at, consider it like it's a type of a diagnose, in where just like when you look at medical studies, they'll look at these intricate details to figure out the cause of the illness. That's the same thing when we're trying to see, well, what's making their marriage fail? We're going to see, is it a dhanb? Is it something that is relevant to what is happening? Or is it an ithm? Is it something that is probably not relevant, but it's slowing down their ability to be committed? So, to help us sometimes figure out the solution to a number of different, let's call it, number of different spiritual problems, or at least practical problems, we need to figure out what is keeping them back. What really is happening? Is it an ithm? Is it a khati'ah? Is it a dhanb? Is it dhulm nafs? What really is going on? Of course, this is a general thing to say. This is a general thing to say, but it's important to learn these areas, because what we need to see is sometimes to help us grow. When you look at, go back to that ayah right there, ما يكسب إثما. When you look at the word ithm, we said ithm is basically anything that would slow down bringing in the good outcomes. So when you look at yaksib ithman, the word yaksib would basically mean that a person is basically coming in and of course coming in and bringing coming in with different behaviors that are slowing down, basically getting the real gain. So what is yaksib? Yaksib means to gain, but you don't gain sin. So how's that even possible? So this is basically telling us that there are those that would, instead of gaining something, it becomes a burden on them, where it's slowing their process, slowing their ability from slowing their ability,
That's
slowing their
amazing.
ability.
That's amazing, subhanallah.
It's amazing, these things. Sorry about that. All right, so it slows down their ability to actually grow stronger. La ilaha illallah. All right. وَمَن يَكْسِبْ إِثْمًا, think of it as, yes, you might think of it as a gain, but the real outcome is that that is affecting you. That is all right. Sorry about that. وَمَن يَكْسِبْ إِثْمًا may yaksib ithman, it becomes not a gain, it becomes a burden. So when you look at the word yaksib, although it sounds like you're gaining something, but it's actually a burden that you will carry. What is it? Ithim? Al-itham, like we said earlier, it's basically something that slows down good, slows down your ability to engage and bring in a good impact and a good thing onto you. So therefore, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يَكْسِبُهُ عَلَى نَفْسِهِ. What you had actually gained is something that is a burden on yourself. So if you think that, oh, I won this, I won the lottery. In reality, you didn't win the lottery, you actually had brought in a burden. What is that burden going to look like? How is the outcome going to be? Is it going to make you feel probably going into anxiety? Is it going to bring you more problems within your family? And that's why the Salihin used to say, I would see the effect and the impact of a sin that I committed on my wife, on my children, on my even on my deb, even on my animal, and even on the different things that I would have around me. So simple things. It could be your car not starting, could be your clothes getting ripped, whatever it is. All these things can be an outcome of what yaksibuhu ala nafsih, of an evil deed, of a wrong thing that you had committed, a sin that basically be a burden that one, it could be something that you could trace back, that it's related to a sin that you had committed called the dhanb, and it could be something that you may not be capable of tracing it to where and why it resulted in that, in where it would be like al-khati'ah. Al-khati'ah, you can't necessarily trace it, and al-khati'ah would be, again, could be done on purpose and it could be done by mistake. But at the end of the day, is that when you look at, of course, sin, at the end of the day, it basically is against, let's see, I'm going to make sure what you guys are seeing. Yes, you're seeing the page that I'm seeing. When you look at sin, it basically is a way where, yes, it will cause, number one, ظلم النفس, and الظلم, speaking of ظلم, الظلم basically is, yes, you're oppressing yourself, and of course, you're bringing a burden onto yourself. That's why it's called oppressing yourself. It's called you're oppressing yourself because you're causing a burden to yourself. It's nothing that you'll be capable of carrying. So how can I actually remove the impact of sin, or the impact of dhanb, or the impact of khati'ah, or the impact of al-ithim? What can I do? So the simple rule is yastaghfirillah. It's basically ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for forgiveness, and the ayahs yajidillah. Now, yajid, or comes from the root wajada. The word wajada actually means a couple of things. The word wajada can mean to find, and the word wajada could also have and share the same root as wujd, which means to have a deep love for something. I know that it's oh, Arabic is so beautiful. Arabic is so beautiful. All right. So here, يجد الله, it's really telling you that you would find, if you would do istighfar, you would ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for forgiveness, you would basically find that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's like you're searching for something. And that's the thing. Usually when a person commits a sin, or they would basically engage in any type of behavior, they're in search of something. We're in search either for more, I guess, exoticity, we're in search of maybe an interest, we're in search of some form of happiness, we're in search of position, we're in search of different things. We're trying to run after something. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us that usually what is causing you to engage in sin is the search of something. So get that istighfar and bring about what you're searching for. And the true search is that you're searching for the Lord Almighty. How on earth did I get there? I'll explain. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in Surah Nuh, Prophet Nuh alayhi salam actually tells his people, فَقُلْتُ اسْتَغْفِرُوا رَبَّكُمْ إنه كان غفارا يرسل السماء عليكم مدرارا ويمددكم بأموال وبنين ويجعل لكم جنات ويجعل لكم أنهارا. If you look at this ayah, Prophet Nuh alayhi salam says, I had told them to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for forgiveness, istighfar, right there. And the Lord Almighty would send the skies with pouring water over you. يرسل السماء عليكم مدرارا ويمددكم بأموال وبنين. What is the water going to bring us? Well, أموال, it's going to bring us more produce. It's going to bring us better abundance of wealth, of course. And the abundance of wealth basically brings in better families. And of course, يمددكم بأموال وبنين. You would have more children. ويجعل لكم جنات ويجعل لكم أنهار. And of course, that brings in a better civilization, brings in Jannat, it brings in gardens around you, brings in flowing rivers. It basically brings in a good civil community. What actually brought that? How was that at all relevant? So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us of what we're actually in search for. So when people commit a sin, they're usually in search of wealth, they're usually in search of stability, they're in search of growing in different ways. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was basically telling you, I know you're in search of something. When you're struggling in search of something, do istighfar, seek Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you will find that the most thing that you actually will be fulfilled with is really the love for the Lord Almighty.
Can I ask a question?
Yep, just give me a second.
Oh,
Where
sorry.
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually says, أَلَا بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ تَطْمَئِنُّ الْقُلُوبِ. We verily, by the mentioning and the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the hearts are finding content. The hearts are content in finding pleasure. And they would find Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala غَفُورًا رَحِيمًا. You would find Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala most forgiving and most merciful. Go ahead, Noor.
I was just gonna ask, is that the fitrah?
Good question. Sorry, I was drinking water.
Okay.
Is that the fitrah? Yes, it is part of our human nature. It's part of our human nature, which we share with animals, in where we are in search of things that would sustain our life, things that would give us a possibility of probably having more security, safety, things that would bring us more of course, fulfillment that we share with animals. All right. That's why you would see animals building, whether it's nests or trying to build different ways to bring about security, or basically different ways to grow family, to basically fulfill ourselves. And of course, when we run after this, why do we love money? We love money because it's part of our fitrah. We recognize that by having money, we're basically having and creating a better chance of sustaining ourselves by at least not needing people. And with our money, we can get a better privilege. With more money, we can probably secure better health and being able to maintain our health, bring us more money and bring us a pleasureful experience in expansive homes. And of course, we relate money, for example. We relate money, we relate security, we relate power, and of course, positions. All of those, we relate to it as a mean of survival. It's part of our fitrah. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually says in Surah Al Imran that it was beautified onto you. حب الشهوات من النساء والبنين والقناطير المقنطرة. That it was beautified, it's part of your fitrah, that men would love women, women would love men, and certainly shahwat, different lusts, because it gives us, of course, a certain level of ecstasy, a certain level, of course, dopamine, whether it's all these different things that would make us happier, all of these different things. They're exactly the same thing that we would find even in animals. It's basically the fitrah. Certainly it is. But when people would run after it, it can be something that without you recognizing, sorry, it can be something that without you recognizing, it basically is what brings you that outcome in what you as a human being, of course, as we share with animals, we're basically in search of a better life, in search of stability. It's basically our mean of survival. That mean of survival, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically telling you, beware of continuously searching for that mean of survival, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically told us, as in Surah Taha, in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whoever sticks unto the Lord Almighty's principles, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, فَإِنَّكَ لَا تَضْمَ فيها ولا تظمأ فيها ولا تضحى. You would not find ظمأ, which basically is thirst, and even not find the extreme excruciating heat, or even find hunger. In other words, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given us the resources. The resources are there. The resources, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put them within earth. Put them, your rizq is there. Your rizq is already decreed for you. This is not something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not give you, but in fact, he had decreed it for you. It's there. It's an issue of many times that you would be running after, thinking that if I would only run farther, faster, probably use different cutting corners, that I'll probably get more of my rizq. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically telling us that no, your rizq was already decreed. That's why the hadith of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, in where the Prophet ﷺ had actually said that إِنَّ أَحَدَكُمْ يُجْمَعُ خَلْقُهُ فِي بَطْنِ أُمِّهِ 40 يَوْمًا نُطْفَةً, that each and every single one of you would basically be combined in the wombs of their mothers 40 days nutfa, and then the different stages. But then it basically mentioned that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would then order the angel to write the rizq, to write basically their shaqiyun aw sa'id, whether they are going to be acting in good or whether they're going to be acting in evil, and certainly ajalo, how long they're going to live, and basically write the main things of their own decree. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically explaining to us that yes, it's part of your fitrah to search after that. It doesn't mean that, oh right, I can just sit and the rizq is going to come my way because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decreed it already. No, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered you to do a sa'i, to basically harvest, to plant, to put in the effort, to bring in an outcome. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was basically right there telling you, don't cut corners and try to engage in either sin or engage in what would actually be a dhulm min nafs, what would be considered as you're oppressing yourself by cutting corners. And the truth of the matter is that live based on the principle of the Lord Almighty and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you will find Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually giving you the forgiveness, actually giving you the rahmah, giving you the mercy, and giving you, of course, the rizq that you were in search of. True rizq that you were in search of was really that rizq, that rizq that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had made as, yes, part of your nature, but what you're actually in search for is really the wujd of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is really the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is really that stability. وَمَا يَكْسِبْ إِثْمًا فَإِنَّمَا يَكْسِبُهُ عَلَى نَفْسِهِ. And whatever burden the person carries, whatever sin the person carries, at the end, it basically is bringing a burden onto themselves. They're basically putting in more weight on their own selves and not bringing good to themselves. وَكَانَ اللَّهُ عَلِيمًا حَكِيمًا. And the Lord Almighty is all-knowing and all-wise. Why? Because it relates to the different ayat that we had mentioned earlier, in where it relates to telling you that when you hold on to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you hold on to the principles, because remember, it was here telling us, إِنَّا أَنزَلْنَا إِلَيْكَ الْكِتَابَ بِالْحَقِّ لِتَحْكُمَ بَيْنَ النَّاسِ بِمَا أَرَاكَ اللَّهُ. Here, it is related directly to recognizing that when you abide by the truth, to and basically judge by what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given the Prophet ﷺ in terms of sunnah or in terms of the definition of justice, then in that situation, that basically is going to bring you the outcome of bringing in good results on the individuals and even on the society. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in relationship to speaking about judging by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's commandments, that's why the ayah would go in details and tell us, well, if you were to commit sin, or if you were to oppress yourselves, whether that was directly relating to you or indirectly relating to what the consequence would basically come back to you. And of course, فَإِنَّمَا يَكْسِبُهُ عَلَى نَفْسِهِ. And I want you to look at the word يَظْلِمْ نَفْسَهُ. And what I wanted to actually do, I wanted to take you to this article. So you can see I'm putting a lot of effort to actually say my words.
May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you.
Sorry about that. All right, so I want to look at the words right there. Got this beautiful article. All right, and again, it's at the same website that we did. And what this article was basically doing a really good job in where when we're looking at the word ظَلَمَ. Now, the word ظَلَمَ actually shares the same etymology with the word ظَلَمَ, which basically means darkness. So how is it that the word ظَلَمَ, which basically would mean to exceed the limit for something, all right, actually share the same etymology and the same meaning with something that actually means darkness? The Prophet ﷺ, although the word, this quote here, فَمَنْ زَادَ أَوْ نَقَصَ فَقَدْ أَسَاءَ وَظَلَمَ. Although the context when the Prophet ﷺ had said this quote, and let me translate what it says, فَمَنْ زَادَ, if anybody were to increase or decrease, then they had basically done it wrong, and they had oppressed themselves, or they had basically exceeded the limit. So when you look at asa'a is to be wrong, or zalama would to exceed the limit in anything. So therefore, when we look at zulm, it would basically mean that there is a limit the second you exceed your limit. And here's one thing, is that usually I want you to go back just a little bit here. When you look at ظلم النفس and the word ظلم or ظلم, it usually has a portion of it that you have the right within it. Let me give you an example. So when you basically have, let's say, you work and you have an amount that you're supposed to be paid, basically the tuition. But let's say, even though you get paid, let's say $1,000 a month, let's just, hypothetically say $1,000 a month, by taking more than $1,000, that's dhulm. And that's the same thing when we're talking about, let's say you're taking care of a child, but then within this time that you're taking care of the child, you basically had exceeded the limit of whether it's your authority, your power, or the rights that you basically have upon this child. That's a dhulm. All right. So dhulm would basically mean that you exceeded the limit that was given to you. So when you look at exceeding the limit, such a sin is usually entailing that you have a certain limit, you have a certain power that you were given, but then you abused that power, you abused your authority, and you had taken more than what you deserve, or taken more than what you basically have the right to do. All right. So when you look at the dhulm right there, it's basically to leave the amount that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given you, the amount that Islam had given you. And therefore, if you think that had given you a privilege, you had been mistaken, because that privilege that to you had thought that it was a privilege, you had basically manipulated yourself. So going back right there to this word, when we say يظلم نفسه, that would really be to manipulate yourself by bringing in really an oppression to yourself without you realizing. You might have committed an assault and you thought that that assault basically gave you more power. The truth of the matter is that by going out of the boundaries, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will basically hold you accountable, and this will bring in a punishment to you. So everything will basically click and will basically come back to you without you recognizing. So we're going to go back right there in where, of course, by staying within the limit, within the boundary, that is al-adl. So the opposite of dhulm is adl. The opposite of oppression is justice. The opposite of dhulm is al-adl. Now, of course, the dhulm and the dhalam, dhulm, basically oppression, dhalam, darkness, they basically have one conjugation. But the reason for that is because of dhulm is when a person is basically blinded from seeing truth, blinded. So we're looking at dhulm, basically blinded with internally, their intuition has been blinded. But al-dhalam is that when their vision is blinded, all right? So when the person's vision is blinded, their sight, their physical sight is blinded, that's when it's called dhalam, darkness. But dhulm is when their intuition is blinded, that's when it's called oppression. You see, I love it. You see that relationship? I love it. It's like there's a visual blindness.
That goes back to what the ayah you were saying about in being in the womb of dhulamat.
Absolutely. ظلمات. الظلم ظلمات. It basically takes you from one blindness after another. So the person that basically oppressed other people, they will find themselves not only committing one thing, it basically leads to another blindness because that intuition, their heart is blinded. When their heart is blinded, it becomes that let's call it perpetual blindness without them realizing. It just takes them into more and more oppression till they become nothing but tyrants that are just really abusing others one after another, and they start finding in it some form of joy, just abusing others because they think that it got them some power. They would think of it. Think of the people that are shabiha in Syria. They would commit all those atrocities, commit all those crimes, and then later on they would start laughing, thinking that it's funny because they would think that it gives them joy. But what they don't recognize is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically counting it for them. Let's look at the word ظَلَمَ. In the Quran, of course, it came 289 different places. And of course, ظَلَمَ as a verb actually came in 35 different places. And of course, the most word that was mentioned with this root, ظَلَمَ, is really in the conjugation of ظَالِمِين. And of course, it was really in order in the context of warning people of committing such injustice, and of course the impact it might have on the individuals and even the societies. And of course, synonyms to the word ظلم is basically one, aggression. Udwan is aggression. Naqs is the reduction of basically people's rights. Shirk, and of course, those are different words. So sometimes the word ظلم, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can mention that in the context of any type of aggression is considered ظلم. In reducing people's rights and not giving people's rights is basically as an antonym to ظلم, to basically oppression. Shirk, associating partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and basically denying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's gratitude over you is actually considered ظلم. And of course, not applying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's principles, the rules of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is considered ظلم. And certainly corruption by not living the limits of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or exceeding the limit, or a form of course, using force. And this is al-Baghi. Al-Baghi is using force. So there's a difference between abusing somebody and without necessarily using force, and between using force and terror to abuse others. So that is also a higher level of abuse, a higher level of oppression, which is using force and scaring people to submit to your oppressive authority. That is in Islam al-Baghi right there. Al-Atu, same thing. Al-Hadm is basically the word al-Hadm actually means to digest, but this is not a digesting, but this is as if the person is taking people's rights and then they would just simply digest it, take it in, and it basically starts affecting them without them realizing. And of course, al-Hadm right there, and where yes, you probably digested people's rights, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would be the one to actually let that basically eat you up without you recognizing. Ta'addi is transgression, in where the person is transgressing other people's rights and of course harming them, in where they're going against the boundaries. And il-janaf, and which basically would also mean that the person is abusing a person's vulnerability, a person's weakness, and of course giving themselves, and of course if they're going to be abusing their vulnerability, that would basically entail that they're abusing their power. So in that situation, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically tells us to make the story short. Those are the verses of the Lord Almighty. We recite them upon you in truth, and the Lord Almighty does not want and does not attempt basically to bring in a dhulm lil alamin, does not want to oppress people or bring in aggression or bring in injustice within the societies. So the whole reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent revelation, sent the Quran and Sunnah, was really to bring in justice, to bring in, of course, the society in order to find that stability. وَلَا يَظْلِمُ رَبُّكَ أَحَدًا. And the Lord Almighty does not abuse anyone. So this is, of course, this is just in short, in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, yes, mentioned, you could see a lot of ayat in the different, speaking about the different types of dhulm. There are different types of dhulm mentioned in the Quran. Number one is basically the ideological type of oppression, in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had mentioned here, speaking on the tongue of Luqman. Luqman was quoted in the Quran, Ya bunayya la tushrik billah inna shirka la dhulmun azim. O son, do not associate partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for associating partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is magnificent oppression. So when you would say that the different types of oppression is basically the oppression, ideological, visual, visual dhulm, visual oppression, in where you're basically not seeing things in the right vision, and whether that is in regards to the Lord Almighty, or whether that regards to how you identify the world around you, how you identify justice, how you identify the different matters around you. So even if we're talking about the theoretical side of it, that would basically entail that this is a form of dhulm. If you're not judging things based on what the realities of what they are, whether it's like Fir'aun, in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had called him basically zalim, simply because he had regarded himself as the Lord and regarded himself as really the one to bring about the civilization, etc. Even though it is true he was actually the person, let's call them the chiefs, basically the chieftain that brought in a type of management to the society of Egypt at the time. So definitely he was bringing in a civilization, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was right there telling us that the main reason for the different types of political or even economical or even the social oppression that he was committing was really as a result of the ideological oppression and simply the vision gone wrong in how he had regarded himself as the deity that needs to be worshipped. And of course, that center had brought in the different forms of dhulm, the different forms of injustice. Number two is another type of injustice. It's basically the injustice, or at least the oppression, the social oppression. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically tells us the main foundation, جزاء سيئة سيئة مثل فمن عفا وأصلح فأجره على الله إنه لا يحب الظالمين. Whoever were to commit a sin, then basically that sin is going to be, well, they're going to be armed with a جزاء سيئة سيئة مثلها. Every single sin basically brings in another sin like it. فمن عفا وأصلح. In other words, the punishment is going to be like it. فمن عفا وأصلح. Whoever were to basically dismiss, in other words, forgive and do what is good, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala فَأَجْرُهُ عَلَى اللَّهِ. Then the Lord Almighty would compensate them from himself. إِنَّهُ لَا يُحِبُّ الظَّالِمِينَ. He does not love the ones to be abusers and oppressors. Now, when you look at جزاء سيئة سيئة مثلها, basically tells us that whatever sin that you would do, it would actually bring in an outcome on you without you realizing. And of course, without you realizing whether the person himself had basically retaliated or not, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would retaliate for that person that was not capable of basically taking their rights back. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would give us the different forms of social oppression and social abuse, in where, whether we're talking about harming people in their lives, harming people in their wealth, harming people in their chastity, and harming people in their status. All those are different forms. All those are different forms of oppression, and certainly abuse and abusing people's levels and people's basically rights without them realizing. And that's why, of course, when we're speaking about suicide, that is considered as a form of oppression too. Why? Because your life is a trust from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and not something that you own. Same thing when we're talking about the wealth that you have. That's a trust from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and not necessarily something that you basically own entirely. It's a trust. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given it to you, whether it's your life, whether it's your ird, your chastity, or whether it's your mind, or whether it's your wealth. All of that was given as a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in where it is your responsibility to use it in the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had directed you to use it in. That is what makes justice. If you were to use it in any way, or even use, remember when we talked about your powers, your energy, your forces, to use it in what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not permit you to use it in, is a form of injustice. The other type and form of injustice is basically the political injustice, in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talked to us, mentioned the number of stories, of course, about Prophet Musa alayhi salam, Fir'aun, and how Fir'aun was basically committing all those injustices within the society. And of course, as a result of really that his aqidah really bringing in the wrong center. وما يكسب خطيئة أو إثما. Is this where we left off? Yes. ثم يرمي به بريئا فقد احتمل بهتانا وإثما مبينا. And whoever, now remember here, so here it said كسب الإثم, and here it says كسب الخطيئة. Those are two things, right? Because كسب الإثم, we talked about it's carrying a burden, right? And we said for al-ithm, we basically said that al-ithm basically slows down bringing in good, slows down your ability to engage in good, all right? Yaksib khati'ah, to basically bring in a burden, but this burden is a sin, but a different kind of sin. It's a sin that you could have done intentionally, or a sin that you could have done unintentionally, or ithm. So whether the person had brought in as or basically a burden, you could carry a burden of an intentional sin, or something that is an ithm, which slows down your deed. And then if you were then, someone basically comes in to bring about justice, or at least to rule in that case, but they ruled in your favor. When they ruled in your favor, they said that you were actually not basically guilty, but they ruled that you were innocent, even though you know very well that you are guilty and that you're not innocent as claimed. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you, in that situation, فَقَدْ احْتَمَلَ بُهْتَانًا وَإِثْمًا مُبِينًا. Then what they thought was gain, then احتمل, it became a himil. Il-himil is a weight that one will carry. Buhtan, it's a blasphemy. It's an ithm It's a clear ithm. It's a clear sin which they will carry, and it will bring in a result on their life, on their health, and certainly it will affect them even in the hereafter. So I want you to look at these areas of ithm, ظلم, su, kasb, khati'ah, buhtan, ithm. Therefore, just recognize, even if the people saw that you were not at sin, or the people ruled that you're innocent, but you know you're not innocent, then in that situation, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you it will be a load that you were carrying. It will be a load that you were carrying internally because you know it's not the truth. And it will be a load that you will carry where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will retaliate either in your health, your wealth, or your life, or in the hereafter. But never will Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala let injustice prevail. Justice, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you that it will prevail and He will give people their rights because the Lord Almighty is all just. We'll stop right here because I can't go forward with my voice really hurting me so much. I put a lot of effort. I think I'm getting a stomachache because of the effort that I was putting.
Oh, Muslim, subhanallah.
But
Jazakallah.
what? Yeah,
We
I'm sorry.
learned so much, subhanallah.
Oh, I was feeling that I was focusing on using so much effort in putting words that I was really losing my focus.
No, I mean, it was really good because we learned a lot. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah, Allah barik fikum ya Rabbi. So we'll stop right here and barakallahu fikum, everybody. If there are any questions, inshallah, I'll answer it. Hopefully tomorrow I'll be feeling better. If not, I'll probably be feeling better the day after, but I'll probably definitely be going to the pharmacy and getting something to make my throat feel better because this is taking all my effort.
Do the salt water
Yep,
and goggle.
yep.
Sometimes you just make tea without milk and goggle it. It's good
Inshallah.
before go to sleep.
Yes, inshallah. Inshallah.
Better. Inshallah.
Well,
Jazakallah
jazakallah
khair.
everyone. And barakallahu feekum. We'll see you all, inshallah, either tomorrow or the day after. Well, tomorrow is
Inshallah.
Friday.
Bismillah.
Inshallah.